got on the worst stretch of fucking road. Look at this. Potholes all over the place. Bumping around trying to do podcasts. Sucks. Oh, here we go. There's some fresh blacktop. It's gonna get smooth here. Oh, smooth. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I'm trying to rock another episode of this, Making of Fred, my short film Fred, Part 2. We kind of talked about writing. Talked a little bit about storyboarding, and I don't think very much. So, yeah, just to kind of recap, the very first thing I did, of course, was write a script. And then I started going into kind of my designs. I wrote a script and recorded the voices and made an animatic. When I storyboard, it's like shitty little thumbnails. And I love drawing with a ballpoint pen. Because you can't really erase, and it is what it is, and it's sketchy, and it just kind of has that fluid fun. Like, pencil looks a little too light. And you commit some nice black ink. And so I filled a sketchbook up with like little thumbnail sketches. And they're not in beautiful storyboard panel. Like I draw my own squares. And like the aspect ratio always changes because my square changes. And I'm just trying to get the flavor of the shot. Is it a medium? Is it a wide? Is it a close-up? Is it, am I playing with perspective? Or am I just trying to, meat and potatoes, just kind of get a head and shoulder eye line or eye level shot to get a piece of dialogue across, or, for me, it's like, do I want the camera to disappear, or do I want to be very self-conscious about the camera? Those are my two like questions that I ask myself. And I think the flow of action always has a logic to it, and so I'm just trying to find the logic and sort of honor the pacing that I hear. And I'm open to suggestions, and I've, like I said, I don't know if I said this, but the primary collaborator on this short film was my buddy Matt Hazelrig, and he DP'd. So it was like me and Matt really kind of made the film together. I had gotten some input from my buddy Eduardo Navarro, who's also a DP, cinematographer turned kung fu master. And he, I built a set and a puppet. Actually, I built the set with the help of my buddy Gerald Howard. He did much of the sets. In fact, he built most of the hallway. He built the front door. And I kind of augmented the paint job here and there, but he and I kind of collaborated on the walls. I built one wall and the ceiling. He built the other wall. And so it already had these fluorescents overhead for the first shot, and I was trying to kind of shoot this somewhat in order. And so I started with the second half of the second big camera move of the short. And it's the camera kind of goes through the wall. We see the backstage briefly during the title sequence, and then we kind of like truck along with him. He's outside the windows, and we truck straight through a wall into the hallway. And so I lit the hallway, and Eduardo came by, and he was like, he just gave me some pointers. He was like, yes, you have overhead fluorescence, but don't be so literal. Play with the directionality of it. Let those kind of be a little bit of a fill. And so he started my rim light motif with Fred. And I think I had a soft rim on Fred pretty much that whole scene. And then when we get into the backstage, we kind of move to a harder rim light. And it's he's got that kind of orangey clown hair. And you give him a little rim, and his hair and beard sort of light up. And he kind of separates really nice from whatever background he's on. So, I'm not a cinematographer. I'm not a lighting guy. I don't know very much beyond just basic 3-point lighting. And I wanted this to kind of have almost a noir sort of stylized look, like very theatrical feel, because it's backstage of a theater. It should be theatrical, kind of a lived-in but stylized world. And so Eduardo just sort of put me on the path and helped tweak lights for just, I don't know, he came in for a couple hours and he just sort of said this and this. He kind of imparted a philosophy that sort of carried me through that whole scene. And then I showed that first Holloway scene cut together, like just rough cut together, to Matt Hazelrig, and he was like, wow, this looks really good. And because I was like interested in trying to find a partner. I wanted to get more daring and bold and creative with the backstage scene, and I knew I kind of wanted to work with a cinematographer. Because, like I said, that wasn't really my forte. I had built the puppet and the costume and some of the sets with a lot of help, mostly from Gerald Howard. He built the stairwell, and he built the sink, and he built a lot of the little props and doors. John Sumner built like the mirror and the pogo stick and the outfit, and that he wears, his costume that he wears when he goes out onto stage. The kind of superhero getup that was Sumner. I made his costume, and Sumner made the boots and the hat and the pogo stick, and he made a bunch of posters that I littered all over the place. Those are all John Sumner original sketches. So I got a lot of help doing with a lot of that artwork. And Matt said, yeah, I like what you've started here, and I'd be honored to put my name on this film and continue, lighting and composing the photography on this. He's got a great eye, and he liked my boards. He understood the flow of action that I was going for. We liked similar films. We both really liked Close Encounters and God, I forget what Blade Runner. We immediately geeked out on a handful of films that we were like, he loves movies from the 80s, Raiders, like the influential big blockbuster films from the 80s that when we were kids, we kind of grew up on. Influenced a lot of that kind of that look and feel, Back to the Future. It's actually a really pretty looking film if you look at it, and the way it's edited and shot has a real it really propels you forward. But the shots are all very kind of delicious looking. Time and care is spent. God, I'm watching this series right now on Netflix. It's called Legends. It's like season 1 of a British TV series that I binged it. I watched the entire season. Well, it's like 6-episode or 7-episode season in like 2 days. And it's so good. And the photography is so beautiful. It reminds me a little bit of Passingham. Who lit Missing Link. He just has this really great array of gels, and he really plays with color, and he really separates the characters from the background, and he does such rich, colorful things and makes such interesting choices with different times of day, and the way that the sun, when it's low, plays off of clouds or plays off of the bounce light off a ceiling or a floor, how it can kind of like be directional but also be soft and reflective and rich and atmospheric. I love Passingham's cinematography. I mean, he also lit Pinocchio. And that's a beautifully photographed film, I thought. But we were like, okay, let's do something rich and kind of yummy. And the very first thing we needed to do was figure out if we were going to shoot digital or 35 millimeter. And the thing with shooting 35 is it's expensive, and you have to be really decisive, and you have to carry around a lot of gear. Not only the camera, but like the camera is driven by a stepper motor that goes through this box called a Thingum, and where you program, your exposures and yada yada. And it was just like, do we want to be light and nimble with a DSLR? But digital cameras were so new. We started shooting this thing in 2000, maybe 2001. And the very first Canon Digital Rebel came out. And I bought one because I could afford it. The other Canons were like prohibitively expensive. This was like, oh gosh, I can't even remember. The Rebel came out. It was like $200 or something. And it had a kit lens. It wasn't anything fancy. And it was an 8 megapixel digital SLR. And it didn't have a live view. So I had a little spy cam. That was a little lipstick cam, kind of hot shoed to the eyepiece. So I'm looking through the eyepiece with a shitty little, tiny CCD camera. And that live picture view went into my laptop, and I was grabbing frames on an application called Frame Thief. And I love Frame Thief, man. Back in the day, Frame Thief was the shit. I had kind of graduated from Lunchbox Grabbers to Frame Thief because you could do so much with dialogue. Even though the new Lunchboxes had SoundSync, they did a weird hiccup with live frame. At least some of the ones I was, you get on a series and you just always use whatever their kit is, And I remember it was like first or second season of Robot Chicken. I moved to Los Angeles, and I started banging away on their kind of new generation lunchboxes and like the live. You know, when you toggle to live, it would like bounce or do something weird, and it just kind of threw me. So on my own shit, I just, and I was friends with what was his name, Roman, the guy that wrote the piece of software. I think he was a Czech dude, and so I could call him up if I had issues with Frame Thief, and it was great. It was really, really cool. But this was before Dragon Frame came out, or I guess the first iteration of Dragon was just called Dragon. So I had this Digital Rebel and Frame Thief, and I did a little side-by-side comparison with the 35 and the 8 megapixel Digital Rebel, and I actually liked the Rebel. I liked the image but more, and I was like, fuck it. And there was no flicker, and what you see is what you get. I didn't have to use a lab. Everything lived on my laptop. Everything was agile and portable and relatively inexpensive. And it was a real revolution. A lot of people were purists, and they're saying, oh, God, you're not shooting film. You fucking loser. But I was, like, shooting raw. And it was like a 2K image. It was like less than 2K image. And it was so funny. When I shot Fred, I used the same camera for the whole entire film, even though, cameras got better and better and better. But I shot RAW. Actually, the first 2 shots I shot JPEG, and I really regretted that. I wish I could go back and reshoot those, because I just didn't have the color space or fidelity that the RAWs had. And JPEG can just be so milky and like thin. Like, there's no negative there. There's nothing. There's no detail in the shadows. There's no like range. It's really wild, the difference. When you get into color correct, you see the difference for sure. But initially I was like, oh, it's lighter up memory, and it's the same fucking thing. I can't tell the difference. So I was like shooting JPEG at first, and then I said, you know what, why don't I just in case shoot RAW? And I'm so glad I made that decision, because it really gave the film a lot more kind of depth and juice and interest. And I eventually, once I shot the entire film, I blew it up to 35 millimeter. I went to, oh God, what's that lab up in Seattle? Photochem, or no, I forget. But I was using the Rebel, and I remember I shot the last shot of Fred in Portland. I was shooting at Stage 13, Dan Ackerman's space. He had a really cool stage, and he rented a little corner of it to me. And he and I became just fucking bros. We were just thick as thieves. Just started, we would just philosophize together and hang out and just deep dish. And he had so much gack at that studio. He had all these little, linear slides and weird movers and trippy shit. I ended up making my own hand-mo camera moving like rig by activating some of the stuff that he had kicking around his studio. He was so generous with me, my God. And I paid him for the use of his studio and some of his gear, but man, he gave me such a deal, such a screaming deal. I'm forever in that guy's debt. He's such a sweet, sweet dude. I hope I can scratch his back one day. And so I shot the last frame of Fred, and I was living at my brother's. My wife and I had just split, my ex-wife, who, God, I adore her, Cecilia, who is such a moral support, such a wonderful partner in this epic journey of making Fred. She stood by me that entire time and supported me in so many different ways. And but it was tough because, you know, we broke up, and it, you know, it's always a heartbreak to kind of, you know, be with somebody for as long. We were together 14 years, and but our relationship, you know, had sort of hit an impasse, and I kind of needed the camaraderie of a friend, and anyway, Ackerman was just a real tight pal of mine. But so I shot the last frame of Fred, and I go home, and I'm like, wow, this is cool. And I just started shooting like photography outside. I was like shooting flowers and stuff with my Rebel, and I shot maybe 2 or 3 photos, and my camera died. So that camera survived for 10 straight years shooting a short film, stood by Fred, and was the key piece of gear for me. And it did its job, and it was nice enough to die after I was done. It was like it had sort of been my wingman that whole journey, and it was tired. The little mirror mechanism was done fucking folding down. It was probably full of dust and all kinds of weird shit, and it just fucking died. You know, the moving mechanism in it just quit moving, and it wouldn't even take a frame. And I just kind of just gave that little camera a hug. I was like, thank you for getting me through this film and shooting such beautiful photos. To this day, I still look at some of that stuff, and I'm like, wow, that camera is so tits. I mean, there was so much great contrast and just enough detail. Like you see these cameras nowadays, they're like, I don't know, 28 megapixels or whatever. And yeah, I could have blown up to 8K, but you're carrying around these like 10 mega or 20, 25 megabyte files for a frame. Like, give me a break, dude. Like, you need a supercomputer and honestly, the image quality doesn't really get any better. You know, you got more pixels, great. You can zoom in more, terrific. But how does it look? You know, when you just frame it up and you're not even like pushing in or doing anything, you're just framing. And that's what I did with Fred. I was like, I'm just going to frame it the way I want to shoot it and see it. What you see is what you get. I wanted to just like stay in camera. I did little things in After Effects later, but not much. Not much. I pushed in a hair on a couple of shots, but mostly it was just right out of the camera, right into the edit, and donesy. But so I loved that little Rebel. It did me right, and I actually really liked having the lipstick camera attached to the viewfinder, because people make fun of me. When I animate, I squint at the image. I try to get the image to look dirty and black and white, and I turn my Dragon playback to black and white because I want to see less. Like, if you're looking at a full color HD image as your live feed, that's a lot of information. That's a lot of information for your eyes. And, you know, you've got all the color and detail and composition. And so I squint at the image. But when I was mounting a little black and white lipstick camera to a viewfinder, and there was all this glass in between. It looked like kind of smoky and milky and blown out. And that's what I animated to. And it was perfect. I loved it. I loved animating to that, because then I'm just looking at motion. I'm not breaking my brain over what, how pixel accurate everything is. I'm just kind of going for the gestalt, the loose flavor of like, am I tracking the arcs of motion? Am I getting the increments I want? And so it kind of felt like a beat up old guitar, that's a little less threatening than picking up like Eddie Van Halen's fucking Les Paul or whatever. I guess he was on a Fender. I don't know what the fuck he was rocking. But what else to talk about? Fred, the production was a trip. I started in San Francisco, and the very first set that I constructed was the hallway. And I shot that scene out. Well, first I had to build a puppet. Let's talk about that for a hair. The puppet was a trip. I've totally fucked up Fred's face. He originally was not supposed to have a beard. The very first iteration of Fred had a hinged jaw, and I kind of made it with a ball and socket joint. I had a post coming out of the back of the skull, and then the lower jaw was just like a sandwich joint with like a little paddle. And then I made kind of propoxy teeth that I painted, and I used these green 4-stretch pantyhose to be his skin. And I was originally, the first iteration was wire lips. So in the very first shot where he's talking, Jim, and his first line of dialogue, look at his mouth. It's just a hinged jaw with wire lips. And so I'm fabricating this thing, and all of a sudden, I'm trying to do just a dot of zap, and it wasn't coming out, so I gave it an extra squeeze. And all of a sudden, whatever was like gumming up the hole of the zap popped out. A little hunk of dried zap popped out, and then it was like that watery zap, the thin shit, and it just flooded all over his mouth. And I remember I was like on the verge of tears, I was just like, God damn it. And I didn't want to start over. And all of a sudden, in my, my stupor of, zap inhaled stupor, I said, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to put a fucking beard on this motherfucker. And I decided to just do this sort of trimmed orange beard. And I'm really glad I did. I think it kind of gave him a cool look. But that technology only lasted one shot. And then the very next shot I decided I wanted to change and get more out of these mouth shapes. So I made a range of lips so I could get an ooh and an and an ah. And I sculpted those as hard part lips. And I called it the beard skirt. And there were 2 snaps on the upper lip. And I think first it was Velcro. I would, between frames, I would like move the jaw. I would like open up the teeth. I still had the hinged jaw with the teeth, which was very like clamshell Muppet technology. It's like, and then I would like adhere the new replacement beard. And so I had a whole, I don't know, I had like 8 or 9 beards that I made, different shapes. And I tried that for a shot or two. And then I said, no, that's not really working. And I made a different kind of beard tech for the last shot of that sequence. And then when he goes into the backstage, I was like, you know what? Fuck all this. And I just chopped Fred's head in half. And I got rid of the hinged jaw teeth. And I just put a big giant replacement mouth. And Tennessee Reed Norton helped me kind of like create this master mold that would sort of like fit these little grooves. And I just did a magneted replacement, like the bottom half of his face was just replacement. But those each had animatable lips, so you could put like a, you know, like if you're going from a extreme close to an extreme wide open, you could do a little follow through on the next frame. And I forget, we came up with a funny name for him. But I made 9 mouths, replacement mouths. And it was fun. I went crazy with the teeth. Every one of them had a whole different kind of like teeth design. So his teeth like change as he's talking. If you just look at his teeth, they're all over the place. And it really sealed the realization that you can get away with murder with these mouths, and you don't need a fucking shit ton. You just need a little handful. You know, you need the TH, you need the ah, you need the ooh, you need the and then you need a variation of emotion, you know, downturn, and maybe he was never really happy. So, you know, it was just E, eh, ah. You know, you want some different shit in there. And that was Fred. I don't know. I'm going to stop here. I think, you know, if this is at all interesting, hang tough. We're going to do a part 3. Making a Fred.